One.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McKerracher with Why Left.
So today on Why Left, we're going to resume the conversation that was cut short about the election. Well, it wasn't cut short for Dave, but it was cut short for me. My Comcast internet cut out while we were recording. And Dave was able to salvage it because he's amazing. He has magical talents and skills. He can make people appear out of thin air. He was able to keep the stream very, very interesting. But I didn't get to finish it, which was frustrating for me because I love talking to Dave about these things. So I want to pick it back up today. And we're going to talk a little bit about the role that race in particular has played in this election and the conversation about race. We have a only semi-provocative title. I really think that there's an element of truth to the title that we've got for this video here today.
And the title is, I will read it off right now, The Most Racist Campaign of Our Lives. Maybe I should have said campaigns, plural, because I know that's what we mean.
Yeah, that might be helpful if you can change the title as we go.
I'll do it
so
right
that people
now.
don't think we're only talking about one side.
Right.
It really was quite bad this time. In terms of when we were born, I was born in 92. Dave, when were you born?
87.
87. Wow, yeah. So yeah, I would say including both 88 and 92, you can go all the way back. This campaign had the most overtly racist language in it of any campaign that I've had the misfortune to have to sit through. I heard so many just unreflexive, unconscious references to racial groups throughout this campaign, people trying to make claims all the time about how different groups of people are interpreting the election based on nothing more than their race. And I heard it from Democrats, I heard it from Republicans. It was really, really grotesque. And it's one of the things that I think is symptomatic of the damage that has been done over the last 20 years by people ostensibly interested in overcoming things like racism. We have instead created a situation where the first thing people think of when they see somebody is their race, where the first thing that people talk about when they think about an election is racial groups, and where immediately, what are people looking at? They're not looking at the major change in the percentage of voters with college degrees voting for the Democrats and the Republicans, or the percentages of voters in different income brackets voting for the Democrats or Republicans. No, what they immediately go to is gender, sex, and race. One of the things that sticks out, and this has been said by a long time by social scientists for a long time, is that Hispanic voters, the Hispanic voting population, it's not a racialized voting bloc. It is not the case that Hispanic Americans vote a particular way because of their skin color. You do not see reflected in electoral data some kind of huge, overwhelming percentage. In the United States, there was a more extreme gap in whether you have a college degree versus not than there was in whether you're white versus Hispanic. This really was not a meaningful difference. There is one racial group that votes overwhelmingly for one party, and that's Black Americans. But that's the only racial group where the percentages are greater than, I believe, 70% for one party. Every other racial group in the United States, you're talking about numbers in the 40s, numbers in the 50s. It's not as if this tells you very much at all about somebody just looking at them. And yet, over and over and over again, this is the language that's being used.
Yeah. And I think part of what we want to achieve in this episode, especially in this first hour, the free side, is what we mean by what Benjamin just said. I think a lot of people are going to see this as a sort of both sidesism. On the one side, you're going to have Republicans who say, what are you talking about? We're on the side of colorblind racist. We get called colorblind racists because we think equality before the law is what should be, and we're against this affirmative action thing. We're against the DEI thing. That's the racist thing. And on the other side, you're going to have people who say, yes, but the system is so out of whack. It's benefiting white people so that white people are able to ignore ways of leveling things or fixing those inequalities. They're going to ignore those, and by ignoring those things, they maintain that system of disproportionate advantage that is granted to them on the basis of, let's just say, the fact that they're white. And therefore, of course, DEI and affirmative action kinds of programs, or reparations, or we could say a particularist basic income as opposed to a universalist basic income, a PBI, will get rolled out as like a form of reparations, right? Like that's a woke idea. We saw it in 2020 when only Black residents of Oakland in a certain income demographic were able to get a stipend. And then that same idea was floated in New York City around those months. I'm a little murky on the details of that. I don't think it went through in New York City, but it was being floated. And it's so from the sort of critical race theory to popular racial justice kind of spectrum, from Kimberly Crenshaw on the more academic side to Robin DiAngelo or Ibram X. Kendi on the more popular side, there is this idea that to say what we care about is equality before the law and equal opportunity without changing the system to uplift those who've been historically pushed down, like those particularist basic income kinds of programs, that would be racist. So racism has been redefined as structural racism or systemic racism, but it's weird how we'll say, oh, it's not about you, it's not about the individual, it's not about the person, but then they'll turn right around and call the individual person racist if that individual person doesn't support their idea for how to remedy the structural situation, right? So that's how I understand the current debate. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there are people who are using the concept of racism as a bludgeon to make people agree with particular policies without thinking very hard about those policies or their effects. When you call for policies which explicitly benefit some people on the basis of their skin color and other people are not benefited, no matter what you gesture at in terms of history or in terms of current existing inequalities, the actual effect of this is to create racial tension and generate resentment. And it generates hostility to the state in the groups that are excluded from the program. So if you're someone who wants to see the state be more proactive in helping people to be able to get going in life, whether it's healthcare, whether it's higher education, whether it's housing, it's very counterproductive to support programs which only include certain groups of people on the basis of skin color. The message that sends is that your party doesn't care about everyone who needs housing, healthcare, or higher education, but only cares about certain people on the basis of their skin color or their connection to historical events. This is not a winning strategy if you're trying to actually create big universal programs, big universal changes. The thing to bear in mind is that these people are not interested, by and large, in big universal programs and big universal changes. These people are not interested in things like Medicare for all or tuition-free college or a right to housing. That isn't their objective. The reason that they are supporting racialized policies is that they think that the only problem with our system is that it's not fair with respect to race on the basis of historical injustices, which have ended but not been rectified. So in their view, slavery has ended but hasn't been rectified because there are still inequalities that are downstream from slavery that exist.
Right.
So they think if they economically rectify that inequality, then that will absolve the economy of the sin of slavery, which it still carries within it through the racial wealth gap. And then from that point forward, capitalism will be fair because the historical injustice will be finished off. Its legacy, its aftermath will have been concluded. These are not people who have a problem with capitalism. Even when they claim they have a problem with capitalism, in most cases, they are lying. They are not telling the truth. Because if they actually had a problem with capitalism, then they would be supporting policies which bring people together to confront the capitalist system, and not just to confront the injustices of the past, but which recognize that in our day-to-day lives, we are all of us constantly set upon by myriad injustices. We are all of us having to work too hard for too little money, for too little gain. This is something all of us, anyone who works for a wage or for a salary, has to deal with currently, regardless of their skin color or what they've got between their legs or who they happen to be attracted to. None of that has anything to do with this fundamental problem. They don't center this problem because they don't see it as the problem, the real problem that everybody faces. They don't center the problem of capital mobility, making it difficult for us to come together to demand higher wages or to come together to demand that the state provide various kinds of public services to people. They don't care about any of that. That's why they're talking about this stuff. They only see injustice as a problem from the past, which we have to rectify now so that we can move forward in fairness.
I like what Stevie J just said in the chat. From that point forward, capitalism will be fair. And therein lies the rub. They will never agree that we have reached that point. I think that is where Walter Ben Michaels and Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. both come in with pointing out that what we've had from the largely from the Democratic side of the aisle, but really across both sides, is an argument about what adjustments need to be made so that the fundamentally inegalitarian system would then be fair. So the point is what would have to be done to make the meritocracy meritocratic? Oh, well, you see, it is fair. The game is basically fair. It was just that some people started off behind. So if we could just get them caught up, then they would all be competing on a fair terrain.
Right. And all of that takes for granted the competitive nature of the system, the idea that we're going to spend all of our time and energy in competition with each other, viewing each other as rivals. All of that takes all of that for granted. This is the very sharp limits that are placed around any kind of critique that's historical. It needs to be borne in mind. All of modernity is based on thousands of years of slavery, serfdom, and exploitation. This slavery, serfdom, and exploitation has occurred all over the world. It's occurred among all groups of people. It occurred in the Roman Empire in a non-racialized way. It occurred in medieval Europe. It occurred in the Islamic world. It occurred in China and India and in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Americas. Slavery, serfdom, exploitation, these things occur in every country on the earth. People do this to people from the same religious group, from the same race, same religion, same skin color, same ethnicity, same language group. They do it because they want time energy.
Right.
And the way to get time energy is to get someone else to do work for you so that you have free time. The problem historically is that only a tiny number of people have been able to enjoy the surplus. And they have had to find ways to keep everyone else down and keep everyone else working so that they can enjoy the surplus. Now we have an enormous amount of technology. It should be possible for more of us to enjoy the surplus and for more of us to do wonderful and cool human things with it. And they say to us, no, we're not going to share the surplus with you because we don't think that you would know what to do with it if you got it. And instead, what we're going to do is change the rules around for how you compete for jobs.
Yeah, this is the approach that I've been taking in my introduction to sociology class that I'm teaching on campus, as well as the guest lectures that I've been doing in Anne in her class. So for friends of the show, you all know who Anne is because she was with us in the last episode during the half when Benjamin was not with us, thanks to his Comcast provider. But no, we had a couple of awesome guest lectures over the last week. Anne brought me to talk to both of her classes about habitus and field. And I love Bourdieu, but I only love Bourdieu because I am able to read him through the proper predecessors, Marx and Heidegger, and so I see what he's doing there. But a lot of people, I think they miss the real point. And so a lot of people just think about distinction and how for Bourdieu, it's always just about setting yourself apart through art and fashion, and how, basically everything that comes down to taste, whether you think something is cool or uncool, based or cringe, beautiful or ugly, noble or vulgar, all of this is a classed sensibility. So you have working class resentment, enjoying the things that, like the cheap beer. It's all that they could actually afford. It's the only thing on their horizon of possibilities anyway, so they make an identity out of it, versus the top of the shelf, fine wine and expensive whiskey drinkers who have to cultivate their taste really to differentiate themselves from the vulgar. And then this is associated with the noble. That's what I just gave is a Cliff Notes version of Bourdieu. And it's interesting as far as it goes. People usually take him to be some kind of an absolutist that's saying there is no such thing as beauty. There is no such thing as art. All of it's just class and distinction. But all of this is missing what I take to be the essential point. So with Bourdieu, it's always about distance from necessary labor, showing your distance from necessary labor, distance from preoccupation with necessary labor. And the way I brought that back to Marx and ultimately even Nietzsche and time energy was by saying, look, what matters for us existentially is what's on our horizon of possibilities, not just if it's possible, but is it plausible? Is it preferable? Right? So you have two people, both of them are told, you can be president when you grow up. You can be anything you want to be. But one of them is the child of sugarcane farmers in Belize, and the other one is going to some, upper middle class, charter school in the United States. Okay. Obviously, they do have like this horizon of possibilities. Anything is technically possible. For instance, you could be from another country. It's still possible you could become president of the United States because there could be changes in the constitutional order. There could be, there's all kinds of things that could, logical possibility is just not that interesting to us. It's interesting to analytic philosophers, but for us, we're thinking existentially. And so what matters is it plausible and is it preferable? And the answer to whether it's plausible or preferable is largely based in the relations of production. So the horizon of possibilities is atop the relations of production, and the relations of production are obviously how the class relations are mediated so that the mode of production can be as it is. And so, you got the base, and then you got the superstructure in this sort of simplistic model. But what I'm saying is, I like to look at that as these three levels, where it's the mode of production, the relations of production, the horizon of possibilities. And the horizon of possibility, it's parameters and its stakes and what seems most real or necessary as opposed to most contingent or kind of outlandish and unrealistic. All of that is going to be based in the relations of production. And then a lot of things like taste and class distinction are going to come from obviously those relations of production. And the way I brought it back to Nietzsche was, kind of thanks to Lizardo with his Nietzsche, the aristocratic rebel. There's this amazing quote that he finds from Nietzsche saying that for the aristocracy, greatness, their main two focuses were always otium and bellum. Right? Otium, leisure time. Bellum, war. Bellum, for the sake of otium. We go to war so that we can have our leisure time. Right? And you just think of the master-slave dialectic in Hegel. The whole point is, I don't want to work. I'm made of a special stuff. I'm noble. I know that I would rather die than keep myself preoccupied with necessary labor. I want to be able to enjoy the finer things, but more importantly, I want to be able to do something with my life, something in the realm of freedom. But the realm of freedom is only opened up where the realm of necessity comes to its end. But the realm of necessity never comes to an end. Someone has to make things work in the background. Servants are needed. Serfs are needed. Slaves are needed. But these are just different ways of structuring other people so that they can be useful labor power for the people who don't want to be reduced to labor power, right? This aristocratic consciousness does not see them itself as the kind that does any kind of labor. It doesn't do labor. It lives in the realm of freedom. And this is where it comes down to time energy, right? And so if you read No Politics, but Class Politics, which just came out last year, Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. and Walter Ben Michaels have a whole bunch of fantastic essays in there. And one by Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. is critiquing Django Unchained, because this is a Tarantino film. It was very popular. It was a lot of fun. I think a lot of people had a lot of fun watching it. It's generated some very popular memes, or at least formats for memes, like DiCaprio, looking like a slave owner, right? Like that's a very classic meme at this point. But its major shortcoming, to bring it all back around to what you're saying here, Benjamin, it's like the democratic way of looking at race through and through, which is basically, look, these people just want to feel better than other people. They just want to feel above other people. They just want to dominate other people. What a bunch of assholes, right? What they're missing is that slaves existed to labor, that this was about doing something. That's completely missing from that movie. It's missing from most movies about slavery. The point is that it's about political economy. Slavery is always just one particularly brutal and obvious example of what's going on in basically every civilization, which is the overwhelming mass is doing the majority of the labor, and it's doing it because the base necessities have to be taken care of so that some people can live above that in the realm of freedom.
Yes, that's quite right, Dave. And the focus on race is an attempt to move us away from this, to talk instead about who's getting rewarded for work and who has been rewarded in the past specifically. Because when they talk about the racial gap, they're usually talking about the wealth gap, not an income gap even. So their focus is on the legacy historically of a racialized exploitative arrangement in the past. Now, that's something that you could propose to fix in terms of trying to make sure that different racial groups have the same median level of income or the same median level of wealth. But that's something that you could do by giving wealth to Black people in the United States without doing anything to improve conditions for anyone else, anything at all. It's something which takes for granted all of the labor that is done by everyone else who isn't Black, and which has been done historically by everyone else who isn't Black, with the exception of a very, very narrow elite, which has managed to avoid doing labor through generational wealth. This idea that American society works for everyone who isn't Black is preposterous. It's absolutely preposterous, and it is incredibly conservative. It's an incredibly conservative idea. And every time someone suggests that because somebody's white, that they are living well or that American society is working well for them, they are acting as if a system of exploitation is perfectly justifiable. They are rationalizing grotesque exploitation of a kind that is only getting greater and greater and greater in scale. The amount of economic output that individual American workers generate has become enormous over time as productivity has increased, yet their wages have barely grown. They certainly haven't grown as much as productivity. So people are getting exploited ever more severely, and they're getting exploited regardless of their background. Now, we could start to have a conversation about what can be done about that, how much can be done. It may be difficult to do very much about that, But we don't even begin
We don't even begin.
to deal with that when we're having a conversation about race and about how races are voting
It's
and which blocks of workers have the most money.
no, it's not even on the agenda. It's not even on the table. It's, in fact, not even something that we're supposed to talk about. If we actually want to talk about it, they've got things to call us. In fact, we both come from a time when we were being called things, right? Bernie bros, class reductionists, or they call you a socialist or a communist or an extremist or a terrorist because you care about people having their time energy, right? In fact, I've backed off so far from this leftist label that so many of my friends still hold on to, but I maintain that time energy is the thing that matters. And then, of course, I'll have people like Elton Alkay of the Working Class Intelligentsia writing essays to sort of try to dispel me of that position, trying to argue, no, time energy is fundamentally socialistic. You cannot separate it from, its roots in Marx. And it's like, oh, I can't separate it from Marx's influence. I also can't separate it from Nietzsche or Heidegger's influence. I also can't separate it from Levinas's influence. All of the thinkers that are influential for me are influential. Marx is one of the biggest ones, but no, he didn't consider himself a leftist. I don't consider myself a leftist. He didn't consider himself a Marxist. I don't consider myself a Marxist. But there's some stuff there that's fundamental. And, so the focus on how everything is reduced to socially necessary labor time. Yeah, absolutely. The focus on the fact that labor power is always being exploited for the sake of surplus value. Yeah, absolutely. I'm there. That is what matters. And it's what matters to me because I think it is actually what matters to everybody else too. I mean, okay, it would matter to me even if nobody else cared. But I hear everyone say it all the time. There's things that they want to do, but they don't have the time or energy to do those things. Well, why? It's because your large energy infused repeatable blocks of reliable time energy, have been reduced to labor power. And that's a commodity in the market. That's a big problem if you have children and you want to actually have relationships with them. That's a problem if you want to actually have friends and community. That's a problem if you want to discover and cultivate your talents. So, and this kind of brings us back to the interview that I did with Nance and Mikey on the Theory Underground podcast not too long ago with Nick Land, where, he's like this great thinker of capitalism, but he's never really thought about surplus value, and he's never really thought about if capitalism could be capitalism if it didn't require surplus value. Like, he just hasn't thought about that, and he's definitely never thought about human potential in the way that we are talking about it. He sees people just having desires. People desire the things that they desire. They're just desiring machines. And he's not thinking about the manufacturing of desire over needs. And he's not thinking about the foreclosure of the horizon of possibility. He's not thinking about how we have, dormant talents that need to be discovered and cultivated in order to really become something more. Right? It's just people. People are people, and some people like the opera, and some people like cheeseburgers. Like, it's just people. And it's like, no, the people that I know, all of them have things they want to do. Languages that they want to learn, instruments that they want to play, bands that they want to be in, theater performances that they'd like to audition for, and they can't do it without neglecting their children or without neglecting their sleep, which they need to actually do in order to recoup their energy to go back to work, because otherwise all they have is time without energy, garbage time, dead time, wasted time. And this is the most wasteful system, unless, of course, you're one of those few people who happens to be benefiting from it. But that's a very rare thing at this point. And we can't even say that the majority of the professional managerial class is in like this state of scholastic leisure, scole. No, they're not.
No. Most of the billionaires are workaholics.
Yeah, they are.
And have you heard them try to talk about social issues or philosophy? They don't spend any time reading books. They certainly don't have an inclination to do that. This is a huge problem. This tendency to treat all desires as equal, as having the same value, This allows people to argue that the market is an impersonal mechanism of weighting desires, and that therefore all desires can simply be put into the market, and then whatever you get out of market systems is what you deserve. The reason that we can't have an entire society that's grounded on markets is that in practice, for one, there is a mismatch between desire and money, right? Some people end up with much more money proportionate to their desire than other people. So there's a currency problem. Second, there are many desires that are not actually good for people, that are counterproductive for them, and other desires that are actually good for people and enable them to do things that are worth doing. And the trouble is, when you make this kind of point, some people will say, well, that's just you trying to have power over what other people can want. And this argument seems like it's an argument for tolerance or inclusion or diversity. But what it actually is it's a concealed argument for the sovereignty of the market as the only mechanism for adjudicating who gets what. And if you adopt that premise that the market is the only mechanism, you actually very much limit what people can do, because now you have a single competitive dynamic, a single competitive system that everyone is subject to, and that everyone's desires have to be filtered through. And this means you have really only one decision-making procedure, which produces only one way of living. It's extremely narrow, actually. Mm-hmm. And yet, this is the premise of liberal theory, which takes for granted this idea that the market is the appropriate adjudicating mechanism. And therefore, all that the problem cannot be the market. It has to be things that happened historically that were distortions of the market, that have produced distortions in the distribution of wealth and income that the market, were it freely operating, would not have produced. And therefore, all you have to do to set things right is to go and rectify those distortions of the market that happened in the past, so that markets can operate going forward in a fair and fully inclusive way. There's nothing radical or emancipatory about this at all. Nothing at all. And one of the unfortunate things is that it's not just the Democrats or the professionals who vote for Democrats who are engaging in this. The way that a lot of the people in the Trump movement thought about 2020 was that they didn't win enough votes from minority groups. A lot of their campaigning, a lot of their political strategy was overtly around winning racial groups. They thought about their electorate very often in an explicitly racialized way. Why was Candace Owens centered to the degree that she was over the course of the last 5 years? It's because there's a group of people on the right who think that if Black Americans see someone like Candace Owens talking and wearing a MAGA hat, that will cause them to vote for Trump or cause them to vote Republican. They have the same theory of how this stuff works as the Democrats. Mm-hmm. The Democrats think that if you see a celebrity from your group saying pro-Harris things, that will cause you all of a sudden to become a Harris supporter. And the Trump people think exactly the same way. If you're a white person and you go to a Trump rally, will you be picked to sit behind the president where all the media cameras are going to be? You won't be picked. They're going to pick someone who's from one of the groups that the media thinks doesn't support Trump. They'll go and put someone who's Black in the audience, or someone who's Hispanic, or someone who's a woman, or someone who looks like they might be gay. They'll stereotype across all these different demographic dimensions to try to produce an illusion of inclusion.
Do you feel like this message is actually ever going to get through to Democrats, like at enough scale to actually make a difference? It feels like we, in our own ways, on our own mediums, whatever, over the last 10 years, in a variety of stages and different ways, but we've been saying this, right? And it's not just us, right? We're like the young version. We're like the millennial version of people who've been saying this. Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. has been saying this so long that there's really no excuse for a Kimberly Crenshaw. There's really no excuse for Ibram X. Kendi, right? Like, this is available. Like, I almost feel like you have to be willfully ignorant. You almost just want to have to say, no, I'm fundamentally a white person. I am either proud or ashamed of that fact. And that is the fundamental thing about me. Like, you have to be that. And it's so important that you're ashamed or proud about being a white person. And it's just like anything that would challenge the pride versus shame white person framework, it can't be taken on seriously. Like, do you think that that maybe because of the historic failure of the Harris campaign that people are a little more receptive now, perhaps?
Well, I wish I could say so, Dave. But this demand that people perform an identity that they don't want to perform, and that they be reduced to that, and that they express themselves within the confines of that. It's very anti-Judith Butler, by the way. It's very anti-parodying normative boxes that you've been put in. This demand will continue to be made until it is materially the case that it doesn't work. And from the point of view of the Democrats, while they didn't beat Trump, they were able to persuade a disproportionate number of Black Americans to vote for them purely on the basis that they talk this way. And this is how they think about it. They think that as long as they're getting 86% of the Black vote because they talk this way, that it's electorally in their interest to talk this way, that if they stop this, they'll have to replace those votes some other way. And they have boxed themselves into a corner with this strategy of trying to persuade Black Americans to vote in a very particular way. Now, if you notice, the handful of Black conservative activists will highlight this and go, isn't this ridiculous? And they're right that it's ridiculous. But then they say, on the basis of this, you should counter-identify and support Trump and the Republicans. But that doesn't solve any of the problems that people have either. So you're stuck in a situation where if you keep voting for the Democrats, it just reinforces their tendency to racialize. But if you vote for the Republicans, you can only do this having counter-identified racially. And this is the sense in which it's the most racist election and the most racist situation I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. Because if you're Black, absolutely everything about this election is racialized, and you're not able to do either one without being treated as an example of a skin color. And the pressure to do it can have various effects on, say, white Americans. White Americans can counter-identify and be proud of whiteness, or they can identify with the narrative and be ashamed of it, or they can decide to put this to one side, even though they're hearing a lot of it from the media, and make the decision based on other factors, which I think is what most of them did. But it's very, very difficult if you are Black when you have percentages like this, 86%, 12%. It's extremely difficult to be treated as a human being. And one of the most racist and cruel things about the two-party system in the United States in 2024 is that if you are a Black American voter, you are just either one of the Harris voters by default, of course, or you are one of the weirdos who's supporting Trump. You're either a weirdo or you're either Kanye or you're a serf. Those are the two ways that you can be looked at. You're either a dependent on the administrative state and on the Democrats, or you're a lunatic whack job who's voting for the Republicans. And these are the only two things you can be in the eyes of an enormous number of people, an enormous number of professionals and elites in the United States. And that's despicable. And we weren't this bad. Even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in the 90s, people did not talk about it in the extremely sordid way that they now do. And it's in part because Democrats have decided to frame the Republicans as white supremacists, when they're not white supremacists. They're not at all. They are committed to a multiracial coalition, just like the Democrats are. And they talk to different racial groups one at a time on the basis of skin color, the same way the Democrats do. They have the same kind of language. They have the hats, they have the shirts, they have all the same stuff that the Democrats have. This group, X for Trump, Y for Trump, Z for Trump. They do all the same stuff. But because they are alleged by the Harris Group to be white supremacist, any Black person who doesn't vote for Harris is a fool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is, it's an extremely narrowing and emptying way to talk about Black Americans. It's extraordinarily racist, and it's racist on both sides. Both sides are doing it. And then people try to port this language that they use to talk about Black Americans to Hispanic Americans and try to force Hispanic Americans to think about themselves in the same way. And thankfully, for all of us, Hispanic Americans have roundly rejected that kind of racialization. You do not see any kind of overwhelmingly racialized voting behavior among Hispanic voters. And this is in part because after 2012, the Republican Party saw this as an emerging problem and made an effort to correct it. But once Trump came out with the wall and with this immigration stuff, there was again another effort to frame the blue-red divide as a division with regard to how people feel about Hispanic Americans. And the Democrats have been alleging that the Trump immigration policy is about hostility to Hispanic Americans as Americans. This is obviously not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously not true. Now, that's not to say that some of the hostility to immigrants from the Republicans and from the right is not racist in form. It certainly is. When you say that Haitians are eating the dogs and cats on the basis of their being Haitians, that very clearly is racist messaging. But if you notice, it's not the identity group of the majority of Hispanic Americans who don't preponderantly come from Haiti. So there is an attempt there to include, while at the same time highlighting specific groups for exclusion that are very low percentage of the population, only very recently arrived. So there is racism in terms of the language that's deployed against, say, Venezuelans and Haitians by the Republican Party. But that's very different from, say, targeting the Hispanic population as a whole.
I want to point out a potentially damning, maybe even lethal fact about not the enunciated subject here that you've laid out, or that we're, our discourse. No, but the subject of enunciation himself. I see, Benjamin, that you are yourself white. And that's a problem for at least two people in the comment section over the course of the last...
I'm sure it is.
For the last while. We've had a couple of people point it out, like they think this matters. One person said that you were white-splaining. Another person was asking, are there any Black people in this chat? And the judge of that had said, yeah, I'm Black and this is fucking awesome, or something. I forget exactly what that... I wasn't paying too close of attention, but... let's see what I'm trying to scroll up. I actually want to read it off before I let you respond to that. The judge of that said, I'm Black, but if you think that matters in this context, you are the problem. And then later, much later, someone calling you white-splaining. Judge of that was like, I'm Black, but I don't have a PhD from Cambridge or 10 years of critical social theory. Sit down and take notes. Okay. Here's the thing is I don't think that a person's opinion is qualified necessarily just because of their educational background, nor by the color of their skin, actually. If something is true, and it actually kind of doesn't matter who says it. That's kind of where I'm coming from. What would you say to it, Benjamin?
Well, this is the classic strategy, right? As soon as anybody objects to the fact that they do this, if this person doesn't come from one of the targeted groups, then what they're saying is invalid because they don't come from a targeted group. And if they do come from a targeted group, they're immediately mocked for being a useful idiot. So there's nothing that you can say. These people won't engage in any kind of thinking or intellectual exchange. You are either disqualified because you are not in one of the targeted groups, or you are disqualified because you have refused the protection that's been offered to you, you stupid buffoon. Those are the two responses that they give. They're both very racist responses. These are the most racist things that people say. in our country. They are incredibly racist sentiments that are directed against everybody all the time. It's incredibly frustrating, because we're not even able to begin to have a reasonable conversation about, should you be making political decisions based on the color of your skin? Are political leaders going to target you on the basis of the color of your skin, or do they have other things that are their focal points? In the case of the Republicans, very clearly, I mean, we heard it from your dad, their focus is on illegal immigration. And they have a somewhat larger notion of illegal than perhaps the Democrats do. They think that some immigrant groups that have been made legal shouldn't be made legal, and they have particular reasons for why they think that. But when I listened to your dad talk, I didn't hear him reference ethnicity or race, not once, not even one time. And that has been the general trend for most of the Republicans that I've known or heard from. Now, that's not to say there are none. And that's not to say that the comment about the Haitians eating the cats and dogs was not a ridiculous, absurd, racist slur directed at that population group. It was.
Man, I want to come out in defense of Trump all of a sudden, I think. But before I do that, on the Haitian thing, there's a little something I feel worth bringing up there. But let's see. I wanted to point out a comment. Sanji Vinsmoke said, "You're conflating racism with a mere opinion." And so this is, I feel like, a crucial thing. We got to define our terms. Some people are saying you're racist if you try to treat everybody the same. That's colorblind racism. Then people will say you're racist if you don't support reparations because of institutionalized, systemic, and structural forms of racism that can only be combated through affirmative action programs. And if you're not supporting that, then you're just hiding in your privilege and trying to shore up the wages of whiteness, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, those are a couple of competing definitions of racism. But what you just said is that somebody coming along and doing this, oh, well, I don't have to listen to that, you're white, or you're white-splaining, that itself is racism.
Of course it is.
Okay.
We all used to know this. Back in the 90s, we all understood this.
Yeah, so please elaborate.
If you are deciding whether you take someone seriously or don't on the basis of their skin color, or whether their opinion is credible or non-credible on the basis of their skin color, then you're being racist. If you see another human being, a citizen, or another human on planet Earth, and the way that you decide whether you care about them or care about what they have to say is their skin color, which you look at and make judgments about, you're being racist. If you decide whether to hire or not hire somebody on the basis of their skin color, you're being racist. If what a person is ontologically is their skin color, if that's the most important fact about them, when you look at them, when you think about them, when you talk about them, that's racism. Mm-hmm. We all used to understand this, but there's been a dumbing down of our ability to think over the course of time. And it's come from people who were concerned by the anti-globalization movement in the 90s, who were concerned about what the world might look like after the fall of the Soviet Union, and who wanted to keep us envious of each other, jealous of each other, critical of each other, and suspicious of each other.
Yeah, I think Nance's sort of hyperbolic and provocative way of saying it was that racism was solved in the 90s. And I think he talks about that in his recent piece called Rachel Dolezal, which is definitely worth checking out, everybody. It's on his Substack. He's basically, in his own sort of way, saying some kind of transracialism has a little something to it, right? He grew up in a Chicano community. He was running around talking, acting, and being with the people that he grew up around. He did not see himself as white. He didn't learn that he is quote unquote white until well, post 90s. Let's just say that. Post 90s, everybody's saying, hey, you're white. That means you have to be a certain way. And we don't have to take a goddamn thing you say seriously. And he's like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, what? Weird, a little bait and switch. We all learned that we could get along together and see past our differences and that we had more in common than not. And there was like this kind of shared brotherhood on the streets. And then all of a sudden, from the halls of academia and every, human resources department across the land, we got some kind of a message that said, "How dare you? That's not right." Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Dave, did you ever see the Land Before Time movies when you were a kid?
I have vague recollections of some of those, but you'd have to remind me about plots and character names.
They're these cute little animated movies about this group of dinosaurs, and they're all friends, and they live in this wonderful valley where there are no predators, and they're safe, and they can eat all the trees they want. Anyway, in The Land Before Time 3, their wonderful little paradise is upset when there's a water shortage. There's a water shortage, and they start rationing the water, and the different dinosaurs are taking turns rationing the water. And because they're stressed out about the fact that there's a water problem, the dinosaurs start watching each other using the water, and they become suspicious of different species of dinosaurs on the basis of how often they use the water. And this Triceratops in particular is very scared about the fact that there's not enough water, and he's going after the big apatosaurs. And he's saying, "You guys are too big. You are water wasters. You apatosaurs, you don't have the right attitude to water. You don't take the problem seriously." And, he goes on and on and on. And there's a point in the movie where Littlefoot, the little apatosaurus, it says he's not mad at the Triceratops for being speciesist about it, because he understands that the Triceratops is just worried about the problem like everybody else. And he's expressing his feelings in this way because he's scared. Now, that movie, The Land Before Time 3, came out in the year of our Lord, 1995. That movie has a better take on racism and its causes than anything I've heard since 9/11.
Excluding some wonderful essays by Dr.
Yes,
Adolf Reed Jr.
by Dr. Adolf Reed Jr. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Excluding some wonderful essays by Dr. Adolf Reed Jr. And this is another thing. Let's point out, why do we talk about Adolf Reed? Because Adolf Reed makes the argument that this racial politics is a class politics, that it's a kind of politics which serves elites. How does it serve elites? Well, let's say that you are applying for a professional class job. Say you want to be a professor, right? If you can make an argument that there is this historical injustice that needs to be rectified, and that the way to do it is to take overtly into account the race of applicants when you consider people for jobs, well, this will give an advantage to particular people when they apply for particular high status jobs. It will help those people get those jobs even when their CVs might otherwise be less competitive. And even in cases where everybody's CVs are equally competitive, it will nonetheless give you an advantage. It will give you something that you have over somebody else. So the effect of this is that there's a significant number of people in the professions who have learned to leverage their alleged racial identity for the purposes of getting ahead, whether it's applying to an Ivy League school, whether it's applying to be a professor, whether it's trying to get a job at a media company or to get an art grant or to get investment from wealthy people. There has been enormous opportunities for people who are willing to accept this identification, which is being thrust upon them, to lean into it and to make it the defining feature of them and of their work. Now, they get ahead doing this, but there's a terrible price they pay, which is that they are then expected to talk only about this and nothing else, and to frame all of their artistic and political contributions in terms of this thing. Everything they say becomes something from a Black voice or a voice of color or a woman's voice. And they're not able to be taken fully seriously as intellectuals as a consequence of this. And they're never treated with the respect that in many cases they would deserve, were they to drop the identification as the principal thing which provides justification for their talking. If they would just make an argument, and many, many do, many people have good, interesting, and solid arguments to make, but have nonetheless been elevated in part because of this stuff.
Right. And Dr. Adolf Reed Jr. is going to be our go-to instead of Walter Ben Michaels, even though the two of them are really good friends and have been doing important work for forever. Why? Because Walter Ben Michaels is white, and at the end of the day, it helps to cite somebody who's black. We could also reference the Field sisters with their racecraft book. We could also reference Dr. Christine Louis de Soli with her two PhDs in her book about transcending racial divisions. Will you stand
Musa
by me?
Al-Gharbi recently put out a book that is about this problem. And the thing is, all of the problems that people claim this stuff solves have gotten worse as people have talked in this way. It is not closing the racial wealth gap. It's not creating a situation where poor and lower class people living in major American cities have more opportunities. No, what's happening is that the children of professional class and wealthy people, the people who already, for various contingent reasons, got into the middle class or upper class from racial minority groups, those children have an advantage, not just over white or Asian children from the middle class and upper class, but also from white and Asian children who grow up working class or poor.
Mm. Mm. Now, I think in our last 5 minutes of the first hour here, it would be good to wrap up some of this. I have had up on the screen the ratios, the statistics of the people who voted for Harris versus the people who voted for Trump. I do want, or sorry, not the people, but specifically of these racialized categories. I think that is something that we need to get into. We can touch on it briefly in close, but I think we should get deeper into it on the second half. And the second half is going to get a lot spicier. We're going to bring in some perspectives. We're going to bring in the extremes. We're going to show you how, during a time when everybody is screaming that this is white men, it's their fault, it makes the white nationalist step forward and say something that almost sounds sensible, right? It actually sounds seductive. I think that everything that we've set up here is a good basis from which to critique that sort of popular sort of white nationalist way of responding to the racial scapegoating that we're seeing. But then there's another perspective that's going to argue that the biggest losers in this election were the white nationalists, because what we see is a new multiracial coalition on the side of the Republican Party, that there is a serious realignment with multiple trans people, with multiple Indian people, Hindu people, Catholics and Protestants. Basically, we're seeing multiracial, multi-religious, like diversity. And a bunch of them are pro-choice and always have been. Crazy. And so, and some of them are immigrants. And so that's, this is a narrative. It's a narrative coming from the Substack called Deep Left Analysis. And so it's something that we can touch on, as well as some of the generalized hysteria and these extreme examples. Like, for instance, y'all are some dumb motherfuckers. This is who we are. We are not better than this. This is a famous actor, by the way, named Kevin McHale or Mitchell. I don't know. This was about masculinity feeling threatened and all those who feel comfortable living within that. People like living within the white supremacy structure they're used to. Good luck to all. Good luck to you all who think you'll benefit at all from the next 4 years. R.I.P. Supreme Court for the rest of my lifetime. And then also this different person, Cameron Kasky, says, white men in America are so unbelievably weak. We have it all and are still willing to ruin everything because it doesn't feel like enough. So, we have a bunch of these kinds of screenshots that we can bring in on the second half. I just wanted to bring up a couple to kind of stir the pot. And then the last thing that I want to do is drop in the chat the definition of ascriptive hierarchy. And I want to use that to kind of wrap up a bow here on what we were saying with Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. I know that ascriptive hierarchy was a popular sort of buzzword on the old What's Left podcast. And because we're bringing in Reed right now, it makes sense to touch on it. But an ascriptive hierarchy is a social structure where people are placed in positions based on qualities they inherit rather than on their own achievements. Ascription, the process of placing people in social classes based on qualities they inherit, such as race, sex, age, class, religion, or ethnicity. And then I believe I could summarize, and you can add anything you like to this, Benjamin. But I'll just say, yeah, I could kind of summarize Dr. Adolf Reed Jr.'s approach in The Color Line Then and Now, which is an essay in Renewing Black Intellectual History, which is an anthology that he put together with Kenneth W. Warren a few years ago. He says that ascriptive hierarchies, that arguing over which ones should be prioritized as opposed to which ones should not be prioritized, has become the bread and butter of Democrat versus Republican politics. That both sides are constantly advancing ascriptive hierarchies, and that this is a dead end, that it constantly naturalizes the extreme wealth inequality of our currently existing system while doing absolutely nothing to address that structure itself, except maybe show a little bit more diversity in the C-suite with a bunch of other stupid motherfuckers who would never talk to us and never see us as human. But if they're the right color, they get to say that they do speak for and represent all of their lower class supposed lookalikes, which is absurd. And so I don't know. That's kind of how I would explain it. But how would you explain it? And is there anything from those screenshots or any of like these statistics that you want to address and close?
Yeah, people will pretend that it achieves something for the millions and millions of Americans who are poor, who are working, who have no health care, bad health care, ton of medical debt, who have no education, bad education, ton of student debt, who have no housing, bad housing, mortgages that are incredibly difficult to pay off, to divide everybody up on the basis of race and make our whole political conversation about which professional class and wealthy kids get nice jobs. And to make all of it about that and to encourage you to identify with people who are wealthier than you on the basis of skin color so that you can feel like you're part of this struggle, a struggle which excludes you, excludes your interests, excludes the things you need from the beginning, which doesn't promise you anything and will never give you anything. That is the way American politics has gone in the neoliberal era, as the possibility of doing anything that would actually emancipate the workers or the poor has totally dropped out of the conversation completely and utterly. And to say that this doesn't matter because I'm white, or if I were black, that I'm a fool for saying it because I'm black, is to just refuse to think. It's to be part of the stupidity that's engulfing this country. Please, please don't give this any more time. This way of thinking is so stupid and so rancid, and it has completely overrun our country, and it's overrun both the left and the right. It's so unbelievably stupid. Please do not participate in it.
Thanks, Benjamin. And everybody who's been a part of the live stream, whether I was able to engage with your comments or not, thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. You on the live side can stick around. You will have access to the second half of this, which is always available on YouTube when we're doing it live, at least for now. But it will likely not be available after the fact. Likely after the fact, the only place you will be able to find this first episode or the B-side of this episode will be on Spotify or Substack, and you'll have to become a paying subscriber to access the B-side. And the main reason that we are charging is because people get more into things when they can show some skin in the game. Also, because we want to be able to pay an agent, editor, and socials person in the near future. And having that kind of help on deck from somebody who's passionate about this kind of work would make my life in particular a lot easier. But for now, I'm just a busy guy who doesn't get to read or write. And so, yeah, we do have a paywall welcome to it. Hope you hop over. Join us on the other side. And for the people in the live side, we're about to roll an ad that I made. Enjoy. We'll be right back. Okay. Is it not playing? Hold on. Hold on, folks. For some reason, it's not playing. Let's try again.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture the scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Zizek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button. Subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, tier 4 is amazing because it gives you tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian.
We're back. Welcome everybody to the B side of Why Left.
Yes, today on Why Left, Dave is going to torture me in various ways with things that he's found on the internet, and I'm going to endure it and try to react to it in ways that are not reactionary.
Okay, good luck. I've not had much luck when it comes to reacting to a lot of this in a way that is not reactionary. In fact, I would say that, I have like my progressive side, I have my reactionary side, I have my liberal side, I have my conservative side, I have this huge independent side. But all of these different sides are always at war, and it's because I contain multitudes and I stay in touch with too many things, and I stay open to too many questions, and shit like this. I just, the way it hits, it's not good, guys. And so I'm going to put a big, warning on this. In fact, here, let me hit my button just for the trigger warning.
Trigger warning.
That's Slavoj Žižek saying trigger warning for you all with way too much joy. I don't know if you can pick up on how much joy is in his voice when he says it, but let's do it one more time.
Trigger warning.
But with that said, let's listen to this amazing TikTok.
I would go as far to say that I would purchase a Glock, and if you and I are walking on the same street and it's dark out and you're a white male, you have to be white for this to count, okay? If you're a white male, even if you don't approach me, I will shoot you. Yeah, I know. So, has to be on the street, you and I, has to be at nighttime. During the day, not so much, but at nighttime, okay? And you have to have very white skin, and be a male. I would go...
Yeah.
Yeah, she clearly doesn't mean that. She would never shoot somebody just for walking up to her in the middle of the night. She just wants attention on the internet.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that a lot of these people who've been reacting in the ways that they've been reacting with a lot of these reaction reels are genuine, but also like this line between what's genuine and what's not has become very, very blurry on the internet. And
yeah. But if they talk about violence and then they don't do violence, that they don't mean what they say. And a lot of people talk about violence and then don't do it. And those people are definitely not sincere.
Part of the problem with that, though, Benjamin, is that people do eventually do violence. So for instance, I keep seeing tweets about how people have...
How's your messages, Dave?
Wait, it's not working?
Yeah, we can also see everybody you've been messaging lately, Dave.
Can you actually?
Yes.
You can. They can't. Don't worry. You can. You can, but they can't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from their side.
They can't see all of this.
No, from their side, there's just us over that part of the screen.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
No. Don't worry. Thanks for looking out, though. No, what I was trying to show, though, is this right here, which is yeah. Don't worry. That's not what they see. Okay. So
okay.
we'll just play a few of these. It is torture.
Sorry, guys, I'm old.
No, it's weird cybernetic sorcery that I'm doing here, and so it is very weird.
I hate you, you fucking orange pumpkin. I hate you, you fucking orange pumpkin. You just caused me one of the most important people in my life, my dad. Donald Trump, I hate you. You will never be president again.
They don't get that they voted for someone who's gonna make my friends' lives hell. My life's okay, I'm a white woman, but my friends are not gonna be okay.
White women have...
I think some of these people
Trump's
are
actually gonna win this fucking thing! Oh, Jesus Christ! I'm so pissed off! Fuck! 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 God damn it!
I think a lot of these
I can't believe Trump's actually gonna win this fucking thing! Oh, Jesus!
Yo, I'm scared to go to sleep. I might wake up a motherfucking slave.
I don't think it's made up, man. I know people in my real life who are acting like this.
Why are y'all Trump supporters?
But why would they put it on the internet? Don't they know that it will just result in getting put into these mixes?
I think they think that they're sharing their truth, and that sharing your truth is power, and that it's a way of speaking truth to power. And so they think And then this part right here, this is, I feel permanently scarred by this lady, but I also kind of want to give her a hug. So I'll let you all sit with this one, and then we'll end the reel on this one. Here we go.
It's all right. It's all right. I feel that way too. It's all right. We feel that way together, okay? Let it out. Let it out.
She's as orange as Trump is in this one. Amazing.
Oh, these poor people.
Yeah. And the reason you know, there's this part of me that's just like, look, I get it. Anybody who puts these people into a reel is doing it for malicious reasons. For people without eyes on the screen, Trump is dancing in the background the whole time. It's on a loop. It took me watching this a couple times to realize it's on a loop, but he's doing this one very short dance, and they just have it on a loop. But yeah, having that on a loop behind, obviously, it's just dunking. This is dunking on the libtards, which is, you know, popular. It's been popular since 2016. You know,
it's the Jerry Springer show.
It is.
That's really what it is.
It's like DIY Jerry Springer show. Could you explain what the Jerry Springer show was to people who were not paying attention to television in the 90s?
Back in the long, long ago, there was a guy, Jerry Springer. He would have people on to discuss their family dramas. He wanted people who would explode with rage or get upset or make a scene. He wanted there to be conflict so it could be filmed by the crew, and then millions of people would see these families falling apart on screen. Oftentimes, he would orchestrate reveals of information that would produce over-the-top reactions in people.
Yeah,
kicked off, really the whole reality TV thing, the whole here comes Honey Boo Boo exploitation genre in American reality TV.
Was it Phil Donahue was one of them as well? Is that the name? There's a Donahue. There's also a lady who was doing it. I forget what her name was.
Dr. Phil, I argue, certainly did an awful lot of it. We did an episode of What's Left Back in the Day called The Mao of Phil, about Dr. Phil's tendency to send distressed teens to farms, to labor camps in rural America, where we talked about, how Maoist is Dr. Phil, because he thinks that what troubled teens need is peasant subjectivity.
Oh, yeah. I was listening to one of those Behind the Bastards episodes where they were talking about this sort of like, oh, you're a troubled teenager. We'll have you rolled out of your bed at 3 a.m. and sent off to boot camp to do like crazy treks across the wilderness where you're yelled at by drill sergeants. And this was something that Dr. Phil was promoting. So, yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Send Her to the Ranch became a meme associated with his show. This idea that if you came on his show and you were having a hard time, he would send you to the ranch.
So I told people on this side of the episode that we were going to get into some of the spicy stuff. I only wanted to start it off with this gal saying she's going to get a Glock and shoot white people, but only at night. And only if you're especially white. And then, this sort of cringe reel of distraught liberals. And by the way, I really do feel like this one right here, I feel like some kind of an affinity to this lady. I genuinely feel like she just needs a hug. She just needs to listen to the last episode we did. She's going to be okay. She just needs to get it out of her system. And the fact is I guarantee you, she's got a bunch of people in her live stream chat that were just there for it, and they felt exactly as she felt, and they were encouraging her. And it's there is this kind of feedback.
That's the other thing. This live stream chat, people making this content are anticipating that their audience is going to appreciate this kind of display, and
Right.
So they have an incentive to exaggerate the display. But then also, some of these people, I'm sure, were found on TikTok just posting to followers and And then this stuff was grabbed from TikTok and stuck in
Right.
these reels. So there is a significant difference between people who are making reaction content and people who are genuinely just upset and posting to their TikToks or their Instagrams.
Right.
But I don't think that a channel like Libs of TikTok distinguishes between real influencers who are making a display for economic reasons and ordinary people who are just upset. I don't think they care. They're just looking to make a Jerry Springer show out of reactions.
Right. Yeah, and with the Jerry Springer show, you actually had to fly them in, bring them on stage, ask them about their positions. They would sit there and tell you about why they were a white nationalist or for the Nation of Islam. They'd sit there and tell you about why they feel oppressed because they're a nudist. Folks, if you've never watched it, go check it out. It's actually kind of fascinating because it's kind of like the dunking stuff, the cringe reels that we see on the internet, except that it's done in a very professional environment with like a very fake with a very fake host. You know what I mean? Like this.
Yeah, the hosts on those shows would pretend to care about you and pretend they were there to help you as they exploited you for audience.
Right.
So at least there was some pretense that people wanted you to be doing better. That pretense has been dropped.
Yeah, it's been completely dropped. And then, my point is just that this is extreme. This is extreme. I don't think anybody in my immediate circles was screaming quite like this. And of course, this is performative. There's always that element of you're being encouraged by the algorithm and blah, blah, blah. But I have to say, I have Democrats in my life who are absolutely devastated. And then here's the part that just really kind of threw me for a loop. I guess I'm naive. I guess I kind of just have a sort of amnesia. But I forget that some of the people who consider themselves above the Democrats in terms of like, hey, they have a little theory. They understand how fucked the situation is. They get that Democrats aren't like the solution or anything like that. And some of them call themselves something like communists. Some of them call themselves something like leftists. Some of them call themselves whatever. They've got various ways of disassociating from the actually existing American left. But then they're devastated too. And I'm just over here like, you should watch our episode. We had a great thing about this. And they don't. And it's almost just like, you've got all these people. A lot of them are older. A lot of them are in their 50s, They've just bottomed out. They've got nothing to learn. There's nothing to learn about this. It is just the worst thing ever. Fascism is winning. The rest of our lives are going to be shaped by Project 2025. The rest of our lives, the Supreme Court is going to be fascist. Like this is what you, especially, but also me to the extent that I was able to, we're trying to talk people down from, specifically the Democrats in our lives. I do feel like we need to come back and do a different episode that addresses the jubilee and gloating of the Trump supporters in our lives. Like I do think we need to give them a healthy dose of reality as well. And so maybe like a message to the Republicans in our lives would be a good episode. But for right now, my point is just this. People who think that it's the end of the world and they think that he's literally Hitler do go and do dangerous things. They try to assassinate him. It's happened twice already this year, potentially a third time. I saw some other thing about that. And then, of course, there's the sort of random acts of violence against people in your actual life, right? Which could be cutting off family members, which could be there's all, really, I imagine that there's actual acts of violence considering the fact that there are also people who have killed themselves because of the election results. And this is not based on objective reality. This is based on represented reality, a very specifically framed, catastrophized representation of reality.
And the awful thing is that people from my kind of background, professionals and elites, are creating so much psychological distress in people that they would do these things, whether it's kill themselves, kill somebody else, or even just talk about doing those things, even just make a video where they act like this. It's awful. And it's not at all the fault of the people who are having these reactions, that they are constantly being bombarded with extraordinarily scary messaging about what is going to happen if the other side wins. I would hope that people who have been around the block a little bit might recognize that this kind of hyperbole is thrown out there every election in this country. Every election, we're told it's the most important election. If we don't vote the right way, terrible things will happen. And very rarely does anything quite so terrible as what is foreshadowed actually come to pass. And really, I'm understating it, but very rarely. Nothing as bad as what's said during the campaigns ever actually happens in this country. And I very much hope if you're a young person and this is your first time, we've been around the block, guys. It never is what the opposite party says it will be. There is always a gap between the reality and the way in which it's described by the opposition party. It is not as if you can trust either party to give you a straight account of what's going to occur. They're not going to do that for you. You have to think about it yourself.
Yeah, so what I have up on the screen is this liberal scratched. It's not quite a meme. I don't know so much as I guess it's kind of a meme now because it could function as a meme, but basically what it says liberal scratched, but what's beneath that is a combination of a lot of different kinds of comments and tweets from the internet. And of course, I want to point out, and also some of this is from Reddit. I do want to point out that this is, it's all suspect to me, right? Like, what are the sources of all of this? Like, are these sock accounts from the opposition? Is this bots? You know what I mean? But if you know at least one person in your life who has said something even similar to this, then that's where it gets its cachet, where it's sort of like the reason it kind of works. And in my case, yeah, I've got people in my actual life who say stuff like this. And what is it? Well, it's basically, the idea is this is all liberals going off the hinges here, and they're mostly angry about the Latinos showing up to vote for Trump. And I want to complicate that analysis. I want to complicate the analysis about this being Latinos that showed up for Trump. We can, I really hate the framing of that, and we'll get into the sort of racial statistics mongering in a second. But some of the examples, what are some of the things that you see people saying here, Benjamin?
Oh, I don't even know if I want to read these. Uneducated people, they are simply uneducated. I guess I'm free not to feel any empathy for them. Latino men can't imagine about a woman having the slightest power.
I'm guessing they are hoping for a free ticket home.
When they're on the cattle cars headed to the border, we'll see how they feel. Maybe Trump was right. Most Latinos are garbage. Oh my.
Yeah.
These are terrible. I hope they're getting ready to be deported. Oh, just awful. I guess I am for deportation now. Really? People have to vote the way that you vote, or they deserve to be deported. Jeez. This is just, I thought I was maybe being a little bit over the top in saying that this is the most racist campaign of our lives. No, it really is. This really is the most racist campaign of our lives.
This is.
It really is.
It really is.
And the thing is, these people all think of themselves as anti-racist. They think of themselves as people who are opposed to racism, and they carry on like this. It's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is better because this doesn't focus on, the faces and the names so much. It's just the things that are being said.
Right. And I want to add our favorite face to focus on from time to time, ever since your keynote speech. Vosh said something. Brace yourself.
Oh, yes. I heard this.
Yeah.
This is bad.
Here we go.
If the median income of the Republican voter was lower than that of the Democrat voter at this point. Not mean, but median. They are the party of the working class because the working class is largely stupid, uneducated, and highly susceptible to propaganda. I wouldn't be surprised if the median income of the Republican voter was lower than that of the Democrat voter at this point. Not mean, but median. They are the party of the working class because the working class is largely stupid, uneducated, and highly susceptible to propaganda.
Ay.
The best part is that his entire job is propaganda. He does absolutely nothing with his life in terms of philosophy. Everything he does is propaganda. And every one of his sycophants is an addict to a specific kind of propaganda that is based on getting absolutely nowhere, but driving these kinds of antagonisms, the ones that create the things that they're supposedly fighting. And they're so deep in it, they don't even realize this is just propaganda. And so here he is. He has a bachelor's in sociology. And he's like, oh, look at me. I'm college educated. And I'm educating my audience. Bitch, you're a fucking propagandist. Your audience and everybody with a PhD is just as susceptible to propaganda as you are. Everybody is susceptible to propaganda. The medium is propaganda. The internet is propaganda. And I'm not just saying like the news and the things that we receive through the news, whether it be mainstream or alternative. No, the medium itself at the level of its actual, how it mediates our sensory apparatus, how it extends our central nervous system, how it rewires us. We're all products of propaganda. All we can do is try to counter that. But as soon as you pull this whole, oh, but you see, I'm on the side of the blues and they're the good ones. We're above the propaganda. This other side, you're stupid workers. You're below, you're all so susceptible to propaganda. What you're missing is that both sides of what Matt Taibbi calls hate Inc., right, are profiting off of scapegoating the other side, and that neither side is even close to representative of the overwhelming majority of Americans. The overwhelming majority of Americans didn't vote. The overwhelming majority of workers didn't vote. The overwhelming majority of whites and blacks and men and women didn't vote. And then people say, well, then they are represented. They kind of chose not. No, they chose not to vote. And by choosing not to vote, their vote was against both candidates. Most people are not feeling represented by either side. And that's not the result of propaganda. That's a result of living in a post-trust society where the institutions have done everything that they can to lose their legitimacy.
Oh, it's the rejection of both sides' propaganda. If you don't vote for either side, then you're not convinced by either fear narrative. And there is a silent, very large number of people, if not a majority, but it's a very large minority who are not buying into either side's propaganda. Vaush, this guy, he just sells smugness and contempt, and his followers like him because he helps them feel like they're better than other people. And that's in part why, even though he only has a bachelor's in sociology, apparently, he makes a point to cultivate this look and this way of talking like he's Hegel or Fichte or something, like he's a German idealist philosopher. It's part of this sense that if you agree with this guy, you're in some way an intellectual, or you're engaging in something higher or better than what other people are engaging in. It's consummately right wing in the sense that it is viewing the workers, the masses, as just something to be manipulated, something to be forged and played around with. But I think you'll find disproportionately the people who don't vote are workers, are the poor.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are the least susceptible to propaganda are the people who are most estranged from the classes that make it.
Yeah, the propaganda on both sides is often ostensibly made for workers on either side, but it's made, as you say, by rump professionals, for fallen professionals who are in the working class but don't want to have to feel like they are of the working class. And what Vaush is doing right here is he's telling the majority of his followers who are workers, that they're above the workers. Because, you see, the working class is, generally speaking, reactionary. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really what it comes down to. You have a narrow number of people who are succeeding in the professions, selling smugness to people less successful than them in the professions. You can identify with the more successful people in the professions, and on the basis of that identification, punch down at the people who didn't get to go to school and don't have the familiarity with the language and the forms. And this is another instance, by the way, of this. Identify with people more successful than you who superficially have something in common with you. Here it's the education, it's the language that they use. But in other cases, it's the skin color, it's the religion, it's what they've got between their legs. Identify with someone who's rich, who superficially has something in common with you, and on the basis of that identification, have contempt for the people alongside yourself who actually do have a lot in common with you. Treat them like garbage because you'd rather pretend to be friends parasocially with somebody richer than you who superficially has something in common with you.
Degenerates. You will turn into monkeys.
So now what I want to do is kind of turn to this. I said we would be reading something from somebody who's highly problematic.
Oh, yes.
But
this thing.
The one thing I want to say, just to connect to the A side of this episode, it's back to the ascriptive hierarchies thing right before we move on, just to say people are taught that some ascriptive hierarchies are natural and just, whereas other ones are unnatural and need to be fixed. And they're taught that largely through the schooling system. And so to bring it back to this sort of professional, managerial critique thread and what Vosh was saying, schooling and the idea that the people who sat at the front of class and were able to, focus on things they were not immediately interested in and were able to be disciplined and behaved and control themselves for the overwhelming majority of their most formative years, the A earners, the hall monitors, the people who go on to get diplomas, those people are a part of a system. And it's a system of asymmetrical, ascriptive, hierarchy, naturalization. There's a whole field. Vosh could learn so much if he was actually interested in educating himself and his audience. It's called critical pedagogy. But we'll just kind of leave that for now. The first and second classes at Theory Underground, the idea of the university, and the professional managerial class, consciousness and ideology, those two classes come at this issue from a lot of different perspectives and ultimately give you a good grounding, I think, in what is education as opposed to what has schooling become. And please disabuse yourselves of this notion that the degree makes the difference. Though, with that said, there's some awesome stuff that can come from the university, because at the end of the day, it's still a real chance to get some one-on-one time and some class time, lecture time with people who spent their lives in certain topics.
You just can't use it as a heuristic. And this is the trouble. I mean, this is the whole thing with racism. It's the use of heuristics to avoid having to think about people. You put people in boxes, you categorize them as trustworthy or untrustworthy or learned or not learned on the basis of very flimsy a fact here or there that you might know about them. And we recognize that you can't immediately assume somebody knows everything just because they've got a master's degree or a PhD. We know people with master's degrees and PhDs disagree with each other about all kinds of things. And we also know that they have economic and material interests that sometimes conflict with our own, right? And yet people think it's perfectly fine to demand that people identify on the basis of skin color and make decisions about who to believe and who not to believe on that basis. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely
And
insane.
it really should not be taken seriously. We should get to a point where we don't take this kind of talk seriously. And it doesn't matter whether it comes from somebody with fancy degrees or not. There are lots of people peddling all kinds of stupid crap with fancy degrees. Believe you me, I've been in these settings. I know these crowds. But a lot of it is really stupid and not at all helpful to working people. The thing is, if you're able to get a job and you're able to get people to publish you and you're able to make a decent living, what do you care if it actually helps the workers? Nobody in the academy actually cares if it ultimately helps the workers. It just has to secure publications and citation counts that you can have a job. That's really what these people are after. And they'll write whatever's necessary to get a job, no matter how little it helps.
Last one here. There was a whole list of tweets like this that we never got a chance to go into last week or earlier this week on the previous episode. I hope the male loneliness epidemic eats you mega scum alive. I hope you feel a hole in your soul and feel unloved until your dying day. I hope you rot in your deathbed wondering why women looked at you like you had rabies your whole life as your eyes close for the last time. This person said, "You seem like a very pleasant person, LOL." And this person said, "I genuinely can't believe men want us to care about them. It's fucking pitiful." And there's a lot of tweets that I had that was kind of on this theme. And all I want to say about it is that these people did not feel this way overnight. They already were like this. So it's like, look, most people, most women, most men, they're not like this. Most people are beyond this stuff. Like, this doesn't even clock on most people's radar. But people who get around it very much in social, I was going to say socialists, no, in activist circles or in certain kinds of organizations on campuses, they will encounter this kind of thing and this kind of attitude, this sort of like ready to fly off the handle and sort of have this sort of just I mean, it's the most sexist attitude a person could possibly have, right? You cannot imagine someone saying it the other way around without that being wildly sexist. And yeah, it's not representative of most people. But the thing is I do think that the overwhelming majority of working class people, and you know, this is a problematic thing I'm about to do. I'm speaking for a majority that's silent, willfully so, that avoids polls, it avoids surveys, it avoids voting booths. But I'm going to say, I think my gut sense for this is onto something, considering the fact that I've worked in a lot of places like Amazon and warehouses and construction sites, and it's just like across the board. Mikey was saying this about people at his warehouse as well. Across the board, regardless of whether they voted or not, regardless of which side they voted on, they are aware that this is a type of person that is existing right now, and they do have undue power within certain circles that are generally defined as left. And this is why, because these people are able to operate in such spaces, I don't even see the value in calling oneself left. I don't see any value in trying to fight over the signifier. I know that Benjamin will say it's a certain kind of liberal progressivism. It's a certain kind of rad lib. And I say it's the kind that has defined the word in the last 10 years.
Well, certainly if you allow professional class people to come into your group and to use whatever feelings or hurt or upset that they have to dominate the conversation, that group won't do any good. But I would say it's not even just that isn't the left. I would say that isn't even political. At that point, it ceases to be a political group and becomes a spleen venting place. I would point out on this particular tweet that it's not just a male loneliness epidemic. We're all having a harder time forming relationships, starting families, getting along with each other. The femcel is very much a real thing too. People are having a very, very hard time getting along with each other. It's part of why Vance made that comment about cat ladies, and it's part of why that comment struck such a chord with people. There is a strong feeling that many, many people of both sexes are really having a hard time being sociable with people of the opposite sex. It's by no means a problem which is exclusively male. And it's something that unfortunately, our politics is making worse. Politicians don't care that this kind of rhetoric makes it harder for people to socialize with people of the opposite sex. That doesn't bother them at all.
Yeah, I am very sympathetic to that position, and I think that's basically correct. And one of the things that we'll bring it back to is this question of left. What is leftist? Leftism. Slavoj Žižek has an article about the presidential election results, and in it, he says some things that I tagged you about. I don't know if you saw that on Substack earlier today, Benjamin, but we'll get into it. I already got a comment. It's a great comment. It's a great comment. It's a wonderful comment. It's a very wrong, misguided comment, but it's one worth turning into a sort of, I don't want to say a teaching moment because I don't want to sound like them, but let's keep going. The one we have to get to, or there's two that we have to get to before we can go there. There is this one by 0HP Lovecraft at 0x49fa98 on Twitter. Dear liberals, and if you watch me scroll on the screen, for people who have eyes on screen, it is way too long to read here. We will try our best to summarize it for you and talk about the White Identity Club and its sort of reaction to what we are seeing today. But I will read the first couple paragraphs just to give you all the tone. Dear liberals, I want to start by extending my condolences to you from the bottom of my heart and with all the sincerity that I have. You have lost in a profound way, and moreover, most of you are very confused about why that happened. I am writing this letter now to explain it to you in the most sympathetic way that I can, without any gloating and without any snark, because as much animosity as I might feel towards the left or the liberals in the abstract, what I really believe is that the majority of Harris voters are victims of a deception, which has been going on since before you were born. It often feels in daily life as if there is nothing in the world upon which we can agree. But let's start with the most obvious. In the past 3 elections, the polls leading up to November 5th dramatically underestimated the turnout for Trump, and they overestimated the enthusiasm for the Democrat candidate. You can spin a million theories about methodology and the science of polling and so on, but at the end of the day, the reason the polls were off is that the people doing the polling are all respectable people. They are members of society in good standing. They maintain the standing by going along with what appears to be the public consensus. They suffer from a systemic bias, which tells them that the blue team is good and the red team is bad. In every way, it is possible to be good or bad. The blue team is better than the red team. The blue team is smarter. The blue team is more moral. The blue team has the best economic policies. They care more about other people. They are the best competent, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then a little bit later, he mentions that, he's of the right wing, but none of the people in his life who are blue know this about him. And they don't know it about him because they've never cared to ask him about anything. They don't care about his opinion. They don't care about how he sees the world. They assume he's one of the good ones because he's there in the office with them. But the fact is, though most of his friends are blue, he knows that they would disown him if he were to come out of the closet, which is why he's anonymous here on Twitter. He says, if I don't come out as a right-winger to you, you assume I am on the blue team. And I know from experience that you will treat me very badly if you start to suspect I'm on the red team, which is why I keep my head down. You may think the things I'm about to say are delusional or that I am misinformed. Maybe that is so, but these are my perceptions, and it behooves you at this moment to try to understand them. So, Benjamin, did you read the rest of this?
Yeah.
So what do we want to tell people about the sort of moves that it makes, after that?
Well, I think that what he is highlighting is that he's been made to feel bad about his race, about his sex by these people. And that, I think, really has bothered him over time. He's written this up in a very reasonable sounding way. very similar to the Mencius mold bug open letter that was written when Barack Obama was president. There's this way of sounding reasonable that race realists are and neo-reactionaries are able to gain a lot of ground with, because they will write in this very reasonable way at a time when the people who disagree with them are behaving extraordinarily badly and are totally unhinged and sound completely unreasonable. And so by just having a tone that sounds like you can have a straight conversation, it doesn't sound like it's reactionary.
Right.
But in his particular case, Zero H.P. Lovecraft is a race realist who thinks that biological race is real and that there are major differences among human population groups on the basis of biological race. And it's something you wouldn't notice
Not
reading
this. No.
this.
No.
You wouldn't know that at all.
He even mentions that he doesn't want a white identity club, that that's not what this is about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he talks about a formative moment when he was a little boy, being like, he was at like the store, and there were all these shirts that said boys are gross and throw rocks at them. Then he says, I've been told for as long as I can remember that I am pale, male, and stale, that I am supposed to step aside, and that every great accomplishment in the history of the world was secretly, actually, the accomplishment of gays and blacks and women, and gay black women, whose accomplishments and brilliance I and my kind have maliciously suppressed since, presumably, the advent of recorded history. So this is the tone, this is the approach, this is what he's getting at. It's deceptively relatable, not to me because I am like this person who's like gone through life being like, oh, I guess as a white man, I've had it so rough. No, I've had it rough for primarily poverty, and the process of socialization for me was a particularly rocky one, and that had nothing to do with being white. It had everything to do with like literally my neighborhood and my parents and the jobs that they worked, and that was clear to me before I had any kind of academic sense for these things. I always knew that. So first of all, there's that, but this resonates after college, right? It resonates after college because in college you're interpolated as a white person. And the people who shared it with me, some of my closer fellow travelers who shared it with me, I don't think they shared it with me because they thought this is, theoretically interesting or what. No, they just thought, yeah, he's got a point. And it's hard not to read it and think that he's got a point. And that's why it's so deceptive. It's so
well, and you can imagine
slippery.
a lot of young people might read this and be very much taken in by this view. You can imagine if you've been in English classes in high school, or you've been to an American undergraduate program at a public university, this kind of thing would be very likely to be resonant. And it would be resonant precisely because all of the things that are being done ostensibly in the name of opposing racism have furthered it and worsened it and caused people to counter-identify in various ways. It's so frustrating that people don't recognize that they are creating this as they claim that they oppose it. They are creating it through the things that they say and do. You can oppose something rhetorically, and yet nonetheless, that as a discursive act can fuel the thing that the substance of what you're saying opposes.
Right.
And the anti-racist movement has created an enormous amount of racism, an enormous amount of it, unwittingly, not intentionally, although sometimes maybe intentionally, but for the most part, unintentionally, and just through a total lack of awareness of how this hits. And then what people will say in response to something like what I just said is they'll go, well, you're suggesting that white men are entitled to be racist because of DEI or what have you. It's not about normatives, guys. It's not about who should do what. It's about descriptively in politics. If you do certain kinds of things, it tends to have certain effects.
Right.
And so if you're creating conditions in which people are adopting more racist or race-leaning perspectives, if they're centering race ontologically in their account of what's going on, if it's causal for them in terms of people's behavior, if your praxis is bringing about a condition under which these ways of thinking and acting are spreading throughout society, then your praxis is not anti-racist. It's just not.
Right. If the ways that you are fighting racism invigorate racism, if it gets everybody to start seeing things through a racialized lens, where it's like Pepsi versus Coke, choose your side, and that's what it's pushing.
I wouldn't be surprised if the median income of the Republican voter was lower than that of the Democrat voter at this point.
Oh, I don't know why that came on. Vosh, the ghost of Vosh came back on as we were talking, but okay.
I was going to try to make sense of that.
Yeah, it was that same thing from before, but so
yeah,
we've got.
But I thought maybe it was on purpose because this is a way of talking about people with contempt and smugness that causes them to counter-identify against you and with whatever else is available.
So the one thing I wanted to point to before we move on from his piece, and I do want to bring it back to something that you brought up, Matthew Stanley, in the chat there. Before we move on from this piece, though, I just wanted to bring it back to this statistic, or these statistics that I had up on the screen all through, well, most of the A side of this episode, which were, so it's got Harris on the left, Trump on the right. The voted Harris, voted Trump. So it's 43% for Harris, 55% for Trump. That's white people. 43% versus 55%. Black, 86% for Harris, 12% for Trump. Hispanic Latino, 53% for Harris, 45% for Trump. 56% of Asians for Harris, 38% for Trump. And then we got this other category where 43% were for Harris and 53% were for Trump. And I want to touch on the framing and how the framing naturalizes Zero HP Lovecraft's entire framing. So let's bring it back over here. He says, but alas, I suspect would be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a Kamala to apologize to a white man. No, quite the opposite. The Harris campaign wheeled out Tim Walz, a man we perceive as having no dignity at all, as a lickspittle, as a kind of Uncle Tom with the races reversed, and has the audacity to hold him up as some kind of an example to us. The message is plain. We are all equals, except you. You're the last among equals. The part that I'm missing, actually, is this previous paragraph. I'm glad I read that part first, but it goes like this. He says, the petty contempt that Harris, his campaign, had for white men was almost refreshing compared to the vitriol I felt from Hillary or Obama. I actually think Harris could have made, this is the part, I actually think Harris could have made up a lot of points with white men if she had just gone on camera, candidly, and said something like the following: straight white men, my party has unfairly demonized you for the past 60 years, and I'm here to admit that, and I'm sorry. And I wanted to say, first of all, I do want to hear what you think of that in particular, that idea, Benjamin, but kind of what I'm getting at is that with this statistic making the rounds thanks to places like BBC News that are trying to frame this as, look, 55% of whites turned out for Trump, only 43% for Harris. And then, of course, they'll bring in how many more men voted for Trump as opposed to Harris. It almost seems like because they do assume this racialized frame and they do naturalize it, that it's very likely that one way forward for Democrats, instead of actually correcting course and doing something that would appeal to the overwhelming majority of Americans who are not represented by these statistics, that they will actually start rolling out some kind of message like Zero HP Lovecraft thinks that they should. I'm sorry, white men. We've unfairly demonized you guys. We'll start including you a little bit more in our messaging. What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, all he ultimately wants is to be talked about the same way that other racial and ethnic groups are talked about by Democrats. He just wants the white men to be considered the same as a group among all these other groups. He is entirely committed to groupism as the ontology. He thinks of politics as coalitions among groups. One thing I do want to point out here briefly, in the original racial data, there is a category for American Indians. It's on the census. That category for American Indians was not included by, apparently, this is the BBC that put this out. They cut that and instead ran with other. The American Indians, 65% of them voted for Trump.
Oh.
But that's not included in this particular image. Now, it is true that the American Indian percentage of the U.S. population is extremely low. It's about 1% of the electorate.
Yeah, well, and this is...
So it's not like this is a decisive aspect. But I do think it's telling that because American Indians don't fit in this particular case into the narrative, they're just cut from it. Because either you behave the way that you're supposed to behave for the purposes of these people, or you are treated like you don't even exist.
Yeah, 50. Okay, Matthew Stanley said he did some back of the napkin math and thinks that it was like 56% of eligible voters who voted. So historically in our lifetime, it's usually something like 48 to 49% of Americans that are voting.
Yeah, turnout has been a little bit higher the last few elections, which also saddens me because it means more people are being sucked in by this stupid crap.
Yeah, but I mean, last time I voted for Joe Exotic from the TV show or that docu-series, Tiger King. And this time I voted for my best friend, one of my best friends, Chris Dorr. And so thanks.
I love that you did that. By the way, I read that piece. That was beautiful. I'm so glad that you were able to do that.
Yeah, we forgot to talk about it actually. So yeah, folks.
We ran out of time because of the internet.
Yeah. So yeah, let's take a quick I'll just at least show it on the screen and so people know about it. You can all go look it up yourselves, but basically I took on a quest. I felt like I had two quests that I could take on. So the title is In the Voting Booth Today, Feeling Torn Between Chad's Roommate and Benjamin Studebaker's Quests. The War Within, Sincere Irony versus Ironic Sincerity. With a special guest appearance from J-Reg, our local, or our resident ironist. And so, yeah, basically anybody who's been paying attention to the Substack recently knows about Chad's roommate and how devastated he was by us having land on, and they leaked a bunch of documents from this online coven of chaos magicians, and basically this I consider this to be a work of ironic sincerity, and so I take it to be creative writing, and it's all fun. But I wanted to keep it going, and to keep it going, I would have had to pretend that I was voting for Harris or endorsing Harris for my channel. That's what Chad's roommate said I would have to do to prove that I was not with the evil one, the Purple King. And on the other side, we've got Benjamin's quest. I wonder, do I have the screenshot of that tweet? I do. It's right here. So if you didn't see it before, you'll see it now. I think we brought this up in episode 3, the one with my father-in-law, when I was asking him his opinion of Benjamin's tweet here. Do you want to read it in your own voice?
The most good you can do with your vote? Write in the name of a friend or family member. Take a picture if you can. Send it to them. Tell them why they would make a better president than Harris or Trump. Show them you love them and make them feel special.
There we go. I hit the air horn on my
Yeah.
soundboard, but it didn't go off. But
I did it too. I had a friend out from the UK.
sorry about the delayed reaction on that. I pushed the button like 30 seconds ago.
Yeah. But yeah, I had my friend out from Cambridge, and I brought him along to vote in Indiana to see us vote. He didn't vote, to be clear to anyone who's worried about election fraud. He did not vote, but he got to observe me voting. And I voted for him without telling him beforehand I was going to do it. I wrote him in for president, and he almost, reacted to it. But of course, if he said something to me in the booth that could be construed as him trying to influence my vote, then he would be guilty of voter fraud. So he could not stop me from voting for him, even if he wanted to. And then I told him, yeah, I think you would do a better job. And even though you're not 35 and you're British, you got my vote this year.
Did you give him reasons why you thought he'd be better?
Oh, there's so many reasons why he'd be better. He's hung out with me for years. We've talked about politics since 2016, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, he and I, we go way back.
Nice.
He's been on a few of my podcasts over the years. He actually appeared on What's Left once to talk about Nietzsche.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just skip down to the end here, folks. I do this whole, sandwiched in this whole article is my very zoomed out take on why everything is the Democrats' fault for rejecting, for doing everything they could to disappear Bernie the first time around and then make him appear to be old cloth and sort of overrun the field the second time around.
Have you noticed, by the way, that Ta-Nehisi Coates is being rehabilitated because of his stance on Palestine? People are acting all of a sudden like he's not an identitarian neoliberal because he has taken a stance on Palestine that they like. This is the kind of
it's cute. It's real
stuff that people will let you get away with.
Well, it's cultural amnesia, all that hard work put into that whole, decade of critiquing the Democrats from the materialist position. Like, most of that stuff's inaccessible. You can't even find it. And it's definitely not been handed down in any sort of way. And so it's easy to rehabilitate someone like Coates. But the fact is Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ibram X. Kendi and all these guys, the logical conclusion of their trajectory is just another Israel. It would just be black, right? They all want to make Wakanda. They just want to it's like, oh, okay, cool. So you're against the state of Israel doing what it's doing to Palestine, but the creation of your black ethno-state would actually require, literally the same politics.
And to remind the listeners what we're talking about here, there's a lot of black separatism in Ta-Nehisi Coates' work. There's a narrative that the United States is irredeemably racist and that the only way that black Americans could have a state that would take an interest in them would be for it to be a state of their own in some sense. This black separatism is, of course, a total non-starter, and it implies an eternal and permanent gap between black Americans and the rest of the US population that is unbridgeable except by implausible events. So it creates a kind of racial division in the country that would be eternal and completely unsolvable.
Exactly. Well said. So I'll just read the end of this post. This was a bonus that came up, but I think I'm glad it came up because we were going to get to it last time. So, yeah, I did not throw away my vote. I took Benjamin up on his quest. I say I voted for my old coworker turned best friend, Chris Dorr, because neither party has done anything but insult my dignity and intelligence for as long as I have been politically conscious. Both sides gaslight and socially blackmail me while scapegoating other people in my life. Neither has a plan that seems plausible or preferable for a future worth working towards. Unlike why did it skip up? Unlike Trump and Harris, Chris loves people, doesn't care about power, and has never scapegoated either side of my family, much less the overwhelming majority of Americans who have rightfully lost faith in both parties. Chris brings light, laughter, and unconditional love to everyone in his life, and nothing he has ever done sounds like it was focus grouped, forced, fake, or for profit or power. He genuinely wants the best for everybody. So give it up for Chris Dorr, everybody.
Hey, yeah!
Love you, Biff. All right. So, I mean, I feel like we've pretty much said everything we wanted to about the Zero H.P. Lovecraft. Stanley said something about him up above, about his philosophical position and his influence in these sort of Nietzschean circles, and it's a kind of nihilism and some stuff like that. And it's, it's interesting. I don't know. All I can say is that he just sounds like a Democrat to me. And he's just salty because Kamala didn't say yes, queen, when he talked. So, and maybe that's not fair, but there you have it. Lastly, before we get to the Zizek part of this, I wanted to turn to the deep left analysis take. And we're not going to spend as long on this article, even though I do think people should read it. Go ahead and look at it on Substack. Hold on, I got to pull it up. Deep. Did you read this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called
If you send it to me, Dave, I look at it.
See, everybody, I feel so blessed. I can send something to Benjamin and he will look at it. Doesn't everybody want a friend that they can send their online stuff to, and then that friend will look at it? And then the best part is that if it drives me crazy, he'll talk me down. Whereas most friends, if I send it to them, they get me more riled up. So here we go. It's called, so this is I don't know if it's popular or not, but it's a channel that makes the rounds on Substack. This guy has interviewed kind of like seemingly everybody who has a Substack, including very recently the homie Nance. Shout out to Nance. So yeah, it's called The Deep Left 1, Dilution and Realignment. So first of all, I have no idea what he means by deep left. But if I were to just tease that out from this, I think maybe he means like the real left or something. But he said, this week, Democrats got gangbanged. The wokesters are lashing out and threatening to commit suicide. And then he shows a tweet of having said something and this person responding saying that the majority of rapists are white men. Yeah. Funny. Also, majority of people in poverty are white men. That's these are weird statistics. Many of these people are anti-white, hysterical, and mentally ill, and yet despite it all, or maybe because of it, the deep left still won. If we can look past the most superficial level of elections, Trump won 50.9% of voters, Kamala won 47.6%, the story of 2024 is yet another victory of liberal academia, institutionalism, and culture. Trump won by moderation and concession and set precedents that will determine the future of the Republican Party. Let me explain. And basically, he goes into how white nationalism lost. How would you explain where he's coming from here, Benjamin?
Well, I think that the position of white nationalism or white supremacy within the right has always been exaggerated. Really, it's a different kind of racial coalition politics. And what his complaint is that the Trump movement has moved further in the direction of replicating the racial coalition strategy of the Democrats. It's become more like the Democratic Party in its rhetoric, strategy, and tactics, and has not taken up white nationalism or white supremacy, which, I mean, the sense I got in reading this is maybe that is what he wishes it would do. I'm not sure.
Wait, you're saying that you wish that what?
I'm not sure whether this deep left account is this account actually arguing for white nationalism or white supremacy and lamenting the fact that the Trump movement has moved away from these things. I sort of thought perhaps maybe it was.
I don't know. I've seen a few things he's put out. I'm never sure where he's coming from or where he's getting at.
This is part of the trouble. People who have this kind of position know it's an unpopular position, so they play certain kinds of games to try to get it out there. But I think there's a complaint here that the Trump movement has moved away from conservatism, which in the mind of this person is something like Steve Sailer, right? In the mind of Sailer and other conservatives, this idea that the conservative position is race realism, I don't think that's true.
I think
right?
this guy might be an ex-race realist, and so
though they also use
engages
the
with
status
them.
of ex-race realist to do race realism. Like he's got Hanania here. Richard Hanania has done a very good job of humiliating these people, and I recommend you read him. He says, I think that there is a certain race realism to this view, because identifying conservatism with Steve Sailer is a very odd move. Most people who would identify with the conservative signifier would not agree with Steve Sailer's views.
See, I don't even know who.
So in
Steve
reading
Sailer,
this,
who's Steve Sailer? I actually don't even know.
A white nationalist, the self-ID'd white nationalist.
Which is all you, okay. That's enough. So basically, he's saying those kinds of guys lost, though, is what he's getting at. And so he might be saying that's a bad thing. He might be saying that that's a good thing. It's got a picture here of Trump hanging out with rappers who are endorsing him. I think
because he says that Hanania did a very good job of humiliating these people, I do get the sense in reading this that he does have this kind of position. The decision to equate Sailer with conservatism and to say that Hanania did a good job humiliating these people.
Who did he humiliate?
The Democrats, I think.
I would have to like
certainly knowing Hanania, that would seem to be what he would be talking about.
In the mind of Sailer and other conservatives, Hispanics, blacks, and Asians had liberal genes, whereas whites had conservative genes. As a result, mass immigration would turn Texas blue, but just like it turned California blue, Republicans would never win a national election. This would usher in a permanent Democratic majority, a one-party state.
Oh, no, you're right. I'm misreading. He's saying that Hanania has done a good job humiliating people like Steve Sailer. But I don't think I think Hanania is still a racist. I think he's still a race realist, but I think he pretends to not be,
right,
so that he can sneak racial concepts into his work in other ways. I'm not convinced that, and this makes me, the whole thing makes me suspicious of this as well. I think this is also probably racist.
See, because when I was listening to this, I was hearing him talk about, I was hearing, okay, so there's a Steve Sailer guy with this replacement kind of narrative, and then, Hanania humiliates the Sailer position. And I remember bookmarking in my head at the time, like, oh yeah, I should actually click on that link later. I didn't, and so I never actually went down the rabbit hole, but who knows? Maybe
Hanania has been mainstreamed because he's willing to criticize racists as allegedly ex-racist, but I don't think he's ex. I think he's just tricked a bunch of stupid liberals into mainstreaming him.
Okay. And so basically what I would then say, like the main thing that I was taking from this article that was making the rounds on Substack is just the Democratic Party, the Republican Party is realigning, and that this win consolidates a realignment that shuns white nationalism while promoting a multiracial coalition. And it's also pro-normal gay and pro-non-binary trans people. And he talks about all the different trans people who were involved, and all of the different gay people who were involved, and all of the different Hindu people who were involved.
You see why I would think that this is just also racist? Because it's constantly making arguments in terms of racial groups. And these people will say that they're against white supremacy or white nationalism, but then they'll make all of the arguments in terms of racial groups and constantly reinforce that ontology. I think these people think it's more effective to disseminate the ontology by being anti-supremacist. They want some kind of race war, and they think that if they disseminate racial concepts, that will encourage that kind of racial confrontation. And their way of doing that has been to disavow white supremacy or white nationalism in favor of getting across the racial ontology with other kinds of arguments. And that's what I really take this to be.
The Christian right were the cucks in this election. They sat in the corner of the Republican National Convention and watched as atheists, porn stars, Sikhs, and Hindus took over their party.
This idea that Sikhs and Hindus are taking the Republican Party away from Christians, this is very much group antagonism. He's trying to create hostility among population groups. This is very racist. It is. It's the decline of white Christians by age. But because it's all allegedly anti-supremacism, anti-white nationalism, he's able to get people to act like it's okay. Yeah, look, now he's going to dunk on Fuentes. So because he's anti-Fuentes, it must be okay that he's using all of these categories in this way.
Right. And so this is what I'm picking up on, is that because the last 20 years of culture war have naturalized racial thinking to the point that I am surrounded by guys who say, well, Dave, as white men, we've had it so good. Even like that gal at the beginning of this B-side where she was saying, she's like crying and she's like, not me, I have it so good, but this will be so bad for my friends, right? This idea that we've had it so good makes me want to punch every one of my friends in the face who's ever said that shit. Every time they say that shit, I'm just like, oh my God.
I think most people don't really believe this, Dave. It's just that it's been tabooed to criticize this kind of discussion to the point where people who are really trying to start a race war, you're no longer allowed to criticize their ontology or the kinds of concepts that they use.
Yep.
That's how bad this has become. People are being seduced into staying quiet and just allowing people to throw out extraordinarily racist conceptual schemes. And this is just going on all the time. But I do think that there's still most people recognize that this is revolting and horrible and very retrograde stuff.
Good. I hope so. Yeah. Drives me.
There's just this extremely online group of people who have talked themselves into these absurd positions. And that's why on the A side, I was going so hard on it, because really this stuff is just rancid.
But here's the thing. Do you think that the sort of the wins of multiculturalism from the 1990s, like that kind of sort of live and let live, and everyone's different, we can still get along, and we have more in common than not, and just treat people the same, and like we can joke about our differences a little bit, but don't take it too far, for the that kind of like the 1990s as a sort of like this sort of pinnacle moment. Do you believe that we're going to get that back from either the Democrats or the Republicans?
No.
You don't think we're going to get back from either side? Because I feel like you could get it better probably from the Republican
The problem
side
is that period occurred in between the fall of the Soviet Union and 9/11. So it occurred in this period where there was enormous optimism about the possibilities for people, where people really believed that we could overcome these categories as categories, that we could think in other kinds of ways. There was enormous sci-fi futurism in the 90s about what might be possible, because the fall of the Soviet Union was a huge surprise and expanded the realm of possibility enormously. After 9/11, after 2008, people have gotten mean. People have been increasingly convinced that certain groups of people are just fundamentally different from them. There's been a move into a more Huntington-style way of thinking. And you see this with the way that the Iraq War was interpreted. The Iraq War was interpreted as showing that Middle Eastern people or Muslims are just not capable of getting the benefit of liberalism or democracy, that there's just something wrong with them, or they're not reasonable, that there's something wrong with their religion that has to be ultimately overcome. This is, of course, completely preposterous, absolutely mad racism. But it became a very current view. It became a very common view that liberalism or democracy or whatever just isn't for them because of some fundamental essential difference that goes down to religion or race. That kind of thinking started there in the 2000s. I mean, it didn't start there, but it resumed there in the 2000s. And then it went absolutely gangbusters all over the political discourse. It became the dominant way of interpreting what was going on with opposition to Barack Obama, in part because Democrats did not want to acknowledge that the failure to do the second round of stimulus, the failure to do even the public option for the ACA, the failure of Obama to be FDR, greatly let down an enormous number of people who thought that that was actually what was going to happen. And so they had to frame the opposition to Obama in racialized terms. And this has become the way of dealing with capitalism. People who don't like capitalism or who are frustrated with the way capitalism is being managed, their discontents have to be reclassified as some kind of deplorable, unacceptable position, so that it becomes impossible to criticize this system without being put in the basket of deplorables. And then people who want prestige jobs in the professions are to be so thoroughly intimidated by this that they keep their mouths shut, even though they know it's stupid. And we know it's stupid, but many people are very scared and they won't speak out publicly about how stupid it is. And so then you'll have people on the internet go, well, I've heard of this academic or that academic who says it's not stupid. Oh, yes, it's stupid. It's stupid. It's just that those people have found a way to get and keep a job by propagating it. It doesn't make it any less stupid. It's just that so many people are scared to point out what they can see with their eyes and hear with their ears. And I use a term like stupid advisedly. I'm really trying to drive home. There is a lot of legitimate disagreement in political theory and in political thought. But the people who are propagating group essentialism for the purposes of stigmatizing any group of people, whether historically marginalized or not, these people are not trying to get time energy for everybody. They're interested in other stuff. They're interested in competing for things with other people. They're interested in who's at the front of the line for whatever it is that's being handed out.
Right.
And that's all they care about.
So something I wanted to highlight before we move into the last thing, which is the Zizek article. I wanted to, and specifically the thing he said about Biden being like the most leftist candidate we've had since FDR, which we'll get to. We'll get to it, folks. We'll get to that. By the way, welcome home, Ann. I see you. Ann just got home. And I think she might be listening to us now. Hi. And so anyway, Matthew Stanley said, I can accept that race politics is like an obfuscating stand-in for class politics, but I want to make sure that the immigration conversation is not identified with racial politics wholesale. The left has identified the two in order to avoid seriously discussing immigration.
That's certainly true. There is a conflation that sometimes happens. It's a conflation that is pursued in both directions at points. There is, of course, plenty of scope for objecting to labor mobility and the consequences that large amounts of labor mobility have on local areas, particularly when it's concentrated in very small geographic areas. This is, of course, a disturbance that can put strain on infrastructure, put strain on public services, on housing markets. It is, of course, a factor, right? At the same time, often this frustration gets expressed in racialized terms or in terms of hostility to particular religions. This is exceptionally common in Europe, where the hostility is very much not on the basis of legality or illegality, but simply in terms of Middle Eastern or African or Muslim. It's much more that way, in large part because many of the immigrants in question in Europe do have legal status, came the legal way. There have been, in more recent years, some migrant and refugee crises driven by chaos in the Middle East. But even leaving all of that aside, the argument in European context is rarely in terms of legality. In the United States, it's much more often in terms of legality. People who are opposed to immigration in the United States are much less likely to oppose it for racial or ethnic or religious reasons. Nevertheless, you can find instances. Samuel Huntington, for instance, argued in his last work, his last book before he died, that Latin Americans are not capable of assimilating into American society. So there are some arguments of that type out there from prominent people. Huntington was a Harvard professor. But yes, it's certainly not as if all criticisms of immigration can be lazily subsumed under the heading of racism. Although I do think that there were cases in which the Trump administration and the Trump campaign took this rather far, right? You could say that you think that there's a problem with a particular country in terms of security, but they framed it as a Muslim ban, right? What was it in practice? It was a travel ban on particular states that they were, for various reasons, not sure about what was going on politically in those states, but they framed it publicly as a Muslim ban, right? You can talk about issues with immigration. Do you have to say Haitians? Haitians are eating the cats, they're eating the dogs? That's not necessary, and it's not productive or helpful. So I would say that, of course, these are two different things, but they can be discussed and sometimes are discussed together. So we have to parse it, and we have to look on it at a case-by-case level. But Dave, earlier on, you said that you thought you could say something in defense of the eating the dogs, eating the cats comment. So if you have something you'd like to say, by all means.
Let me see if I can find it. I should have it ready to hand. But let me first, while I try to pull it up, quickly bring it back to the other comment that Matthew Stanley had brought up, because Matthew Stanley is a subscriber at TU. We work together on various research projects, and he's not a leftist. It never has been. Didn't grow up that way. Doesn't have many in his life, and they tend and leftoids don't tend to take him seriously or respect him. And so, but he's a father. He's an upstanding kind of guy. And so he's asking a bunch of questions in the chat over the course of the last 2 hours. And so anyway, he said, I don't know if you can totally eliminate racial politics because racial groups have a natural in-group affinity, but you can make it counterproductive to pursue racial politics. And I thought that's a very interesting way of framing this take, and I was wondering what you might want to say to that while I try to find the thing that I was going to show you about the Springfield.
I'd want to emphasize that the concept of race is historically constructed, that our modern categories of race did not come into existence until the early modern period, largely as a way of explaining why it is that Europeans could colonize Africans and American Indians. If you go back to, say, the Roman period, you would find what would seem to us to be a multiracial, multi-ethnic Roman army with people from all over the Mediterranean, of every color, every appearance, fighting together in the same army, in the same manipular legions in many cases. But they would not have thought of it as a multiracial, multi-ethnic army. They would not use that kind of language to discuss it. There were Romans and there were barbarians, and a barbarian is someone who hasn't been Romanized, hasn't been part of Roman political institutions, and therefore could potentially, if not them, then their kids or their kids' kids, be put in those kinds of institutions and have a different kind of subjectivity produced in them. The Romans often stereotyped on the basis of climate. They thought that people who grew up in the cold north were physically tough but mentally weak. They thought people who grew up in the hot south were clever but physically lazy. And they thought that people who grew up in temperate regions had a nice mix of both. But of course, implied in that stereotyping is that if you move someone from a cold region to a hot region, their behavior will change. And indeed, this argument is often made about Romans who go to a different climate, spend a lot of time in a different climate, that it would actually change their temperament and cause them to acquire certain virtues or lose certain vices. So do bear in mind, modernity is a very short period of time in human history, this period of colonization where Europeans seem to have certain advantages over people living in other parts of the world, and therefore could think of themselves as European, as against these people who are from other parts of the world and aren't modern. This way of thinking is very much a consequence of capitalism and of modernity. It's not something that is transhistorical or baked into our DNA or biology in any way, shape, or form. And indeed, if you go back to that antique period, what you would find is that the pale people from Germania, Britannia, and Gaul were not the most powerful people or the most successful necessarily. And so we're not, and often we're not part of the same states and didn't get along with each other. you would very often have German tribes fighting each other, German tribes fighting Celtic tribes fighting each other, Celts fighting Britons. All of these different population groups could be in alliances with various combinations. Romans could be allied with one Germanic tribe against another Germanic tribe. And all of these people you might think of as white, they would not have even had that concept or even invoked that concept to describe themselves. They wouldn't have even talked about any of what they were doing in that way.
Yeah, this kind of opens up this whole other can of worms that I was like wondering, are we going to get into it? Should we get into it? You know, with the invention of the white race going back to the legal, well, the sort of professional managerial to ruling class, like the PMC was not yet large enough to really constitute a class or something even remotely like what it becomes in the 20th century. But yeah, back before the founding of the country, I think there was Bacon's Rebellion, and reaction against that was to, I guess I should say something about that rebellion, right? Because the Crown was working with the Native Americans as opposed to these black and white workers. These black and white workers like rioted and burned down a bunch of aristocratic buildings in the town.
This motherfucker fight, I keep making this shit up.
They were just like, no, this is messed up. And so, yeah, there was this thing called Bacon's Rebellion, and it scared the living shit out of the aristocracy. And so what did they do? They rolled out racialized privileges, which at the time had real meaning. As a, you know, people talk about white privilege, meaning you could walk down the street and not be worried about, you know, like that kind of thing. They talk about that as white privilege now. But what it really meant at the time was, if you're an Irish indentured servant, you can gain freedom after some point, which used to be true for black indentured servants. But because of these laws being passed, black people could no longer ever gain their freedom. And then mulattoes, which were mixed people, basically, they could gain their freedom eventually, but it would take longer than the whites. And this was like something they put on the books, but it was up until then not a dominant way of seeing or thinking, right? And so this is why the what is it called? Is it the 1419 Project? What is it called?
1619 Project. Dave, I have to run. My next thing is
coming
hitting.
Right up. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, my window was until 5, so I'm over by 15 minutes. I gotta
1619 Project and all the rest of this stuff, folks. We'll come back to it. We'll talk about it next time. We went over. Whoops. Benjamin, thank you so much, man. This has been awesome. Everybody, you've been great. This article where Zizek is talking about FDR and Biden being so progressive, we'll come back to it, but we got to go.
Yeah, we should talk about that in relation to Ukraine at some point, because that's really what Zizek is focused on, in my view.
Let's get into it on Monday.
Yeah. All right, everybody. See you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate having you all here. Lots of engaging stuff in the chat that I didn't really get to address. We could have kept this thing going for 6 more hours if Benjamin didn't have a thing scheduled right then. And we would have had more time as well if it wasn't for the fact that I had to push back this meeting by like an hour and a half so that I could meet with Nina Power, so that we could go over some plans for some really cool stuff that we've got in the works. There's a whole new website, a whole new framework, a whole new approach to the subscription thing here at Theory Underground. But for those who get involved right now, for those who become Tier 2 or higher subscribers at TU via the main link in the description, this is the best time to get involved, because you're going to get a huge discount on things to come. If you join the game much later, though, you will not get grandfathered in. And so there's a huge benefit to getting involved right now. If you're curious about how to get involved, well, then watch this. I made it just to explain what TU is all about and how to get involved. Enjoy.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Zizek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button. Subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people, Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons, thank you. Oh, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons, thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You did so good. Thanks, guys.